but we can give you good questions to think through, right, when you come up against various situations. Because we both have worked for a while doing this, but we haven't encountered everything. But if we can give you good questions, then that helps you make the decisions that you need to make for your people you care about. So, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So I don't have slides because I hate them. Feel free to chime in with any questions or anything. I'll kind of pay attention to the comments also. What is guardianship? So, I mean, kind of very fundamentally, guardianship is a court-involved process, court-centered process, in which we petition the court, we meaning a petitioner, petitions the court to appoint a legal guardian for a person. The guardianship does two things. So when we're petitioning the court for guardianship, we're asking the court to find that a person meets the standard for guardianship, which in Georgia, the standard, frankly, is very loosey-goosey. It's essentially, can a person not make important decisions about their health and well-being? That's all it is. So the court finds that the person meets that standard, first off, and then second off, the court appoints a guardian to make decisions about health, well-being, etc. In Georgia, if a person who is going under guardianship also has assets, property, money, whatever, then they will have to get a conservator appointed as well. So a guardian is going to be making decisions for the health, education, all those different, living arrangements, etc. And a conservator makes decisions about assets. Guardianship is a permanent thing. So once the court has determined that someone meets the standard for guardianship, even if the existing guardian can no longer serve, then another guardian will have to step in. Same thing with conservator. As long as a conservator is appropriate, you get another conservator. A lot of clients ask about, do we have limited conservatorship in Georgia or limited guardianship in Georgia? Like, do we have something that, we can only put guardianship in place for certain things? And the answer is no, we don't have that. We have to, it's whole hog or none. So when a person is deemed to meet the standard for guardianship, then when the court appoints their guardian, the court is effectively removing the person who needs the guardian, removing that person's right to make decisions about healthcare, living arrangements, essentially anything that requires a contract, which is a lot of things when you think about it. Like marriage is included in that. You know, anything where you'd have to sign a contract, essentially, by and large, a guardianship removes that right and instead puts the guardian in place. Um, I think it's important to know that the guardian has yeah. This is the slide that Dana has, and the way that this is phrased is we're literally removing a person's right to make these pretty fundamental decisions, and so it shouldn't be taken lightly when we're doing guardianship. I will say, as part of the guardianship process in Georgia, there's a lot of checks and balances. So theoretically, we wouldn't be putting a guardian in place that wasn't necessary. But the problem is that we don't always look at, I think a lot of people just default to guardianship, and we're not looking at the kind of holistic view, or we're not looking with a holistic lens at what other options are. So with that, Dana, I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah, and I think why Laura and I were so excited to have this conversation is because we agree that this is an important decision in a lot of ways, and that people shouldn't just default to guardianship, right? But that these are essential rights. And when I often do this presentation, for sure by 8 o'clock today, you've traded on all these rights. You've done all this stuff today, right? And so to think about what it would be like to not be able to do that, that's a big deal. And the other thing that I'm going to just skip around in the slides a little bit, is that the guardianship statute itself says that this should be a last resort, that we should be thoughtful, that we should be looking to develop self-reliance and independence. It should only be about what the person needs, and that we should only do this after we've determined that something else won't work, right? And so usually where people kind of come to me is to say, well, what are these less restrictive alternatives? What might that be? And that's really where supported decision making comes in. And so, supported decision making really is the idea that people should be able to get information in a way that works for them, right? Weigh out the pros and cons, the consequences, intended and unintended of a decision, and get support to make and communicate those decisions to other people, right? So we've all participated in supported decision making, every single one of us, right? You bought a house, you bought a car, you had a surgery, you didn't have a surgery, you got married, you got divorced, you started a job. What did you do? Right? You talked to people who knew you, who could help you think through things that you might not be thinking of yourself. You might have talked to people who had been in that situation before, right? When I was looking to buy a car, I had a coworker who just bought a car, right? So I was constantly asking her questions. But we all understand that when we're doing that, the ultimate decision is up to us, right? And that's what we're trying to create for folks with disabilities. So she bought a Mazda CX-5, and I got a Subaru Outback, right? That was the decision that ended up being best for each of our families. I did learn some things from her in that process, but we didn't buy the same car. She didn't tell me what to do, and really, that's the goal with supported decision making, right? And we really kind of lean on this idea that decision making is a skill. So it can be taught over time. And like all skills, we need lots of opportunities for practice. And we have to understand that mistakes enhance our learning, right? There is nothing you know to do today that you're doing well that you didn't learn without making some mistakes. Nothing. You didn't learn to cook without burning yourself or cutting yourself or burning the meal. You didn't learn to drive without a fender bender. You didn't learn to walk without everything. We need those mistakes to help us enhance our learning. And so, in the process of supported decision making, we want to create what we call safe failures, right? We want some guardrails around that, but people have got to learn the process of making decisions, and that's going to come with mistakes. And all of this can seem really invisible, right? I don't remember the class where anyone sat me down and taught me how to make decisions, but I was getting that reinforced in lots of different ways. But if you're a person with a cognitive disability, some of that invisible stuff doesn't happen, right? So we need to be explicit. We need to be teaching this, and so that's really the foundation. That's the basics, right? It's centering the person with a disability, seeing them as the decision maker, and then asking the question, what would it take? What would it look like for this person to be able to have what they need to make the decision at hand? And one of the other things that Laura said that I think is a good kind of counterpoint to guardianship is that this is flexible, right? The A person's needs can grow and change. There's opportunities for, someone might say, you know what, I'm really struggling with my financial decisions right now. I want to do something else. I want to appoint someone to help me with those. But this like household stuff, I got down, and I don't need a ton of support. My medical, I'm getting there, and I want some extra support to do that, right? And we can kind of dice out these decisions. So that's the kind of brief introduction. And I hinted at financial power of attorney. So, Laura, you want to
Yeah,
start talking about what some of the alternatives are?
this is a great segue, I think. So, whenever a person comes in my office talking about guardianship, the first question I ask is, okay, well, what else can your person do? A lot of the times we're talking about a child, but it can be any, whoever you're caring for. And a big piece of the conversation around that is the first thing is any adult who has capacity to sign legal documents should have a financial power of attorney and an advance directive for healthcare, and there are some other kind of adjacent documents to that. Powers of attorney. So the financial power of attorney appoints an agent to make financial decisions on my behalf. If I need help making financial decisions, I can have an agent who can go to the bank and do it for me. An advanced directive for healthcare, same thing, but healthcare. The advanced directive for healthcare contains two different components to that one form. It appoints a healthcare agent, and optionally, it allows a person to elect what kind of end of life care they want to receive. But even if someone doesn't fill out the end of life care stuff, which is a little bit harder for everybody to fill out. That's one of the hardest documents for all of my clients to fill out. But so you could just appoint your agents. But when I have people coming in to do that, the key is and this again goes to my kind of legal context. If I'm going to facilitate a client signing those documents, I have to be confident that they have capacity. So if an 18-year-old comes in and they're sitting down, I have to know that they have capacity. And Dana and I talked about this because capacity does not have a black or white definition under the law. And Dana looks at the definition of capacity pretty differently than I do, honestly. And that's okay because she doesn't have the same standards that I have to meet. But going to her point about teaching your children how to make decisions and how to articulate those decisions, even if they can't clearly verbalize, but maybe they can write or they can find other ways to communicate. When I'm sitting down with a client and determining capacity, I'm asking questions like, do you know what kind of income you have? Like, if is a person
Huge.
receiving Social Security income, are they aware that they're getting Social Security income? If they're working at Publix, do they know that they're working at Publix? And can they tell me whether they're earning $5 an hour or $100 an hour? I don't need them to be able to say, yes, I get 11.95 an hour or whatever it is. I need them to say, yeah, no, I'm not making $100 an hour. It's a lot less than that. But I need them to be able to tell me that. And I think a lot of folks theoretically understand those things, but they're not used to having to communicate that way because mom and dad have always done that for them. And so this is a big kind of takeaway is as your child is growing and evolving, and even if your child is 18, you don't have to immediately go to guardianship. And if you think that your child might have the capacity to consistently say things like, yeah, generally, here's what my income is. I understand that a meal at Chick-fil-A costs something more like $10 than $50. I understand that a car is going to cost a lot more than $100, but maybe not $1 million. These are the kinds of things. It doesn't have to be perfect, but for me, I'm going to be asking specific questions to determine capacity. And if we don't have capacity, those documents are harder for me to advise people to do. And then that means that without a legal representative, some people can find it can be challenging to go about the world without having agents to make financial and healthcare decisions. Dana, you want to
Yeah,
your
absolutely.
thoughts on all that?
So I just went ahead and threw up the balancing act slide because I think on some levels that's still true, right? That capacity is fluid. It's not this static thing. The law is, it continues to kind of tell us that we have to be assessing for it. So we want to be making sure. I think I love Laura making the point that, teach these skills. That is so protective. I had a mom tell me once after a presentation, she said, I really like what you're saying. I don't want to take his rights away, but I just wonder. I wonder what's going to happen if he's out with his friends and they convince him to go to the ATM and blow $100. And we had a little bit of a rapport. So I said, well, Mom, guardianship man isn't going to show up. Like, how do you think guardianship's going to impact in that situation, right? What he needs is knowledge. What he needs is skills. What he needs is to understand I don't have $100 to blow, y'all, right? And I want to hang out, but it can't be $100, right? What he needs is to understand when people are applying too much pressure, right? And those aren't friends. So knowledge can be so protective, and that we need to be thinking about what support can be there to bolster people's capacity. And Laura kind of mentioned that, right? That when we're starting from this framework of can we support that person's capacity to do the things that they need to do, and we've seen changes. So on the right hand side of your screen, these things that talk about functional assessments and decision specific capacity assessments, all of those are improving, right? It used to be I'd see evaluations of capacity that was just a mini mental status exam, right? And I'm really glad that I've never been in the position of someone determining if I needed a guardian based on my ability to count backwards from 100 by 7. because I only know one number, 93. That's all I got. I can't get any further than that. And so to see these, really move in a way that's more holistic for people, I think is really important. The other thing that I'll mention here, that when we're thinking about kind of how do we help people determine, what might be appropriate from them. This is a guide from the American Bar Association, and it's called the Practical Tool, and it's designed for attorneys, but I find it to be really helpful for everyone to kind of start with thinking about these things, right? And some people get a little upset with me for the first one, presume that the guardianship is not needed. But I tell people, look, we just suspend it for a minute. Just take it off the table for a minute and then think through. And I think the second one is really, really important. What's the reason for the concern? Right? What is it that you're trying to accomplish? What are you worried about? What is it that you feel like the person is unable to do? Right? Be really specific, because a lot of people think like that mom, right? And they think guardianship is going to solve problems that it really may not ever solve, right? Because I really don't know how mom was thinking guardianship was going to help in that moment, right? If she's already thinking her son can be out with his friends, she's already thinking he can have access to his ATM card. Where was it, right? That she was imagining the guardianship was gonna change things. And so I think it's
Dana,
really
can I
important.
chime in there?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I mean, one thing that I would tell clients is so guardianship, it can be a protective backstop in the sense of if you want your child to be able to be out and about, to be with friends, to have access to an ATM card, but to have some really strong guardrails, right? Theoretically, a person under a legal guardianship can enter into a contract. So they could have an ATM card, but if they misuse that ATM card, the guardian could go to the bank and say, hey, no, no, like what do you think about that, Dana? As like a okay, well, but mom, could go back to the bank and say he was under guardianship, he didn't have a legal right to enter into a contract, so you need to void that transaction.
Yeah. I think that's possible, right? I think people accomplishing that have a lot of difficulty, right? I think the bank's response would more likely be, you're out that $100, but we'll make some changes to the right. I do think that's what mom was thinking, if I'm telling the truth, right? Is that,
Yeah.
oh, we could get it back. And maybe you could. But I also think that the long-term protective factor, right, is the skills, is the knowledge. And we talk about that. The other thing that people say to me sometimes, I had a friend call me up and say, oh my gosh, we almost ended up with a 4-person cell phone contract, right, for
Mhm.
my one son. Right, we almost had a family plan, because he was at the mall and it sounded like a good deal, and we were able to kind of intervene there. I think sometimes there are other backstops that we don't think about, right? Almost number one, Laura, you should correct me if I'm wrong because I say this all the time, but contract law is contract law, right? And so if people are under duress, if people enter into a contract where someone has been shady, for lack of a better word, right? Those protections still exist.
Mhm.
A lot of things have the cell phone. This is how they got out of it, right? There was a 7-day period, right, of kind of buyer's remorse, and they had to pay a restocking fee and do some other things, but there was another way out of that. So I think it's asking the question, right? It's always asking the question, what is it that we're trying to do? What tools are at our disposal? How can we do that? And I think that's all important because of what's at stake with guardianship, right? Because we're trying to protect against those things. So if we have another way to protect that $100 or perhaps get it back, then let's think about that. Let's try to figure out if we can do those things. And that's why when the practical tool starts with presume that guardianship is not needed, if you read to the end of that, it says, well, if you get there and you figure out that we can't meet these needs any other way, then create a guardianship, right, that is as limited as possible. And so, again, Laura, interrupt and correct. We've had some success with kind of creating limited guardianships in Georgia, where judges have done some, kind of proactive things. It is not on the statutory form, right?
You can't,
And
well,
so
you can't, right. So you can't say, I want a guardianship just for education decisions, or like,
right.
I want a guardianship just for healthcare decisions. But you can say, for example, you could say, I want my child to retain the right to get married, or I want my child to retain XYZ rights. And you can do some of those things. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the law is changing, right? The
Hmm.
law is evolving. We're seeing more of that. We're seeing states that didn't have limited guardianship get them. We're seeing some places do some really creative things with these kind of one-shot guardianships. Like there's a very specific thing that needs to be done, and it's just this thing, and we can't do it any other way. But again, back to our first point, right? We want you to leave with being able to ask good questions, right? Because if you can ask good questions, and you might get to things that work a little bit better. So yeah, I think that it's working through it, right? And thinking about what are we trying to accomplish, what are we trying to protect, and can how else can we get there? And there are lots of something that we had on our list that I don't think we've hit on that I'd like to tell people all the time. You know, a release of information, an authorization for the release of information can be a really powerful tool. I have parents tell me all the time, I'm worried my kid's going to turn 18 and doctors are going to stop talking to me. Well, they probably will, right? But a HIPAA release will get you through the talking through, right? It's not going to get you the power to make a decision, but if what you need is to be in the room and hear the information together and share the information and support that person to make a decision that they then communicate, that HIPAA release can do that, right? That's another thing a person has to have capacity for, right? That people have to believe that they can do that. And so I think it's important just to understand that we keep asking that question, um, you know, those questions, and that can be really powerful to help us figure out what the support is. Yeah, Cheryl.
I just want to add real quick, is usually that's the phone call that I get is, oh my God, I'm taking my child to the doctor. What do I do? And I tell them the exact same thing. And I've been an advocate for many years for many individuals with intellectual disabilities. And just as their advocate, I'm allowed to sign off on something, or they're allowed to sign off on something that says that they call me, they talk to me, and everything else. So it wouldn't be any different for the parents. So that's probably the number one thing. And then the whole, ATM and $100.
Yeah.
So people want financial, they want to know that their finances are taken care of, because there's information out there that all their money is going to get taken out of their account, and meaning the parent's account. And people get really confused about that. And then the medical piece is another big piece. But I just want, and I know this is kind of strange to touch on, I need you to touch on a little bit, is we have people that are ending up in the prison system, or what, where does guardianship hit that? Because parents will call me and say, oh my God, I have guardianship or I don't have guardianship. And for somebody that is being arrested or going through that, and we have that in the Down syndrome community as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Where do y'all sit with what would be one of
That's a
those thoughts?
great that's a great question, and I'll dive in and then let Laura fix it for me. So what we tell people is that the determination around capacity in a capacity and competency in a guardianship context is different than in criminal liability, right? And that those two things don't necessarily inform each other. So we have parents telling us, well, like I was told if I get guardianship, my kid can't be arrested, or I can immediately fix it, or those sorts of things. And unfortunately, we know people in jail with guardians, right? We are supporting people in jail with guardians, and so it is not always the magic shield that people think it is. It may get you access, right? It may get you access to information. For a lot of people, that's also an uphill battle. And so those are the two things I usually tell people, right? That the two determinations are separate, because I don't want people thinking that if we've had this incapacity determination, that means criminal liability is always off the table, right? We haven't found that to be true. And I'm going to go back to that same question. What are you trying to accomplish? And then finding out if guardianship can help you do that. And so if you're a parent and you're planning to have a conversation with an attorney about that, I would ask that question very specifically. Tell me how my guardianship is going to play out in this situation. This is what I'm worried about. So that's how we answer that question for folks.
What I would say is, so I think this is a concern for most people in the disability community, whatever your disability is. If your child is out and about in the world, is engagement with law enforcement. And in my experience, being under guardianship can mitigate criminal liability and arrest. So if you're under guardianship now, I mean, there's a few there, it's complicated because if your child can say, "Hey, I'm under guardianship, let me call my guardian," I mean, then maybe they shouldn't be under guardianship in the first place, right? Um, but um, but usually, in my conversations with criminal defense attorneys, and I
Yeah.
have luckily, I'm happy to say I've only had a couple of cases where I've had to deal with this. Being under guardianship has mitigated both uh, the arrest situation, the jail situation, and the charges. Um, I 100% agree with Dana that it's not a cure-all. It's absolutely true that just because a person is under guardianship, it doesn't mean that they will not be subject to criminal liability. It doesn't mean that they won't be arrested, especially because theoretically, people who are under guardianship aren't going to be able to communicate as effectively what their situation is. And, Cheryl, we had this case, I guess it was a few years ago now, where a kid with Down syndrome, he was a younger kid, was tackled by police who weren't aware that he had Down syndrome. And so, um, there's a lot of ignorant people out there. So the long story short, and I think this is the case with everything, is parents come to me all the time and say, I want to like force my kid to take medication, or I want to, force this or that. Guardianship isn't going to do that. In my view, guardianship is there as a protective mechanism when people don't have the wherewithal, either the wherewithal to communicate their um, kind of fundamental needs, things like, if they're being very victimized by scams and things like that, and we have the potential to lose benefits. Like some of these things are really, really important things. Um, Kind of just to summarize the point that Dana was making, because I want to move on to context, which I think is important to the determination of guardianship. But just to kind of go back and summarize real quick for a takeaway, when we're talking about other avenues to guardianship, powers of attorney are a big one. A healthcare, advanced directive for healthcare power of attorney, a financial power of attorney, the HIPAA authorization, also special needs trust, right? You could set up a trust for your child that has money in it. This is really a long-term thing, right? When they're an adult. But to Cheryl's point about concern about finances, your child doesn't have to have access to a whole bunch of money, right? You can limit that access. So if that's the primary reason why you're going to guardianship, that may not be the biggest concern and a slam dunk to go under a guardianship, because you can set up a trust, you can have a trustee that's managing the money. Your child's not going to have to be responsible for a whole bunch of money. Along the
It
same
protects
line,
the benefits.
yeah, and it protects all the benefits, right? So then they can receive Social Security and Medicaid, and with Social Security, they have their own internal kind of watchdog system called a representative payee that can manage Social Security income. So there are a lot of other ways to get some formal legal infrastructure in place, depending on the capacity determination. Going
Yeah, and
to, oh, go
I'll
ahead.
just hop in. Sorry, Laura, I just want to hop in real quick and say the other things that I think are important there. On the finance side, also, like some people say, well, I don't know that I have the resources to start a special needs trust, or that, that costs money in and of itself. Able accounts and stable
Mhm.
account, like
Yep.
that can be a really protective factor for people. That's what I ended up talking to that mom that was worried about blowing $100 with his friends, right? Well, we can get an able account. We can limit the types of expenses he can make. We can limit what's in there. We can do that with him, so he's learning these skills. That can be really protective for people. And the other thing that actually kind of ties in for me to law enforcement, and it's something that a lot of people don't know about because it's fairly new, are the psychiatric advance directives, right? And so it's basically built on the same premise of the law of an advance directive for healthcare, but says I'm a person that has a psychiatric condition, and if I'm in crisis, these are the things I need you to know, right? The medications that work, the hospitals that work, who my doctors are. There's a whole section about law enforcement. If law enforcement has to be involved, here's how perhaps they should approach. But it gives people the opportunity when they're not in crisis, when they're at baseline, to plan for this crisis. We have not tested this, but we believe there's nothing in that law that's real specific about the psychiatric diagnosis.
I agree with
right?
that. I
So
agree
you
with
could
it.
say
Yeah.
it's autism, it's Down syndrome, right? This is, and when I'm in crisis, this is what it looks like. This is how people might support me better. So is it a fail-safe? Absolutely not. But Laura also just told you that guardianship absolutely isn't. The last thing I'll say about law enforcement is I agree with Laura on the fact that individual practitioners of the law, right, might look at that situation differently if a person has guardianship. But we don't have anything to force them to do that, right? That public defenders and DAs might get together and say, hey, we're going to do this thing a little bit differently. But the law isn't always on our side, right? To say, oh, well, there's a guardianship in place, so these things happen. But I think it's important. And I think talking about the context is really, really great. So that question, right, of what is it? What are you trying to accomplish? What are you trying to mitigate becomes really, really important.
Well, and the context piece of this is also important because going back to Dana's scenario of a kid out with his friends who might go to the ATM, um, one of the questions I ask parents when we're considering guardianship is, do you have a network, right? I mean, are there people in place that your child can go to ask for help? Or will there be people in place that your child can go to? Or, for example, like, is your child attending a small private school where they are not out and about in the world really yet? And, maybe parents come to me when their kid is 18 and we're having this conversation, but their kid is not in any way vulnerable. Maybe they don't have capacity to sign documents, but they're not out and about in the same way that somebody else might be. And so we wait, right? We wait and see how that child continues to develop and grow without getting the guardianship because they're still safe. They're safe. They're in their little bubble. But also, like, if this kid was out and mom and dad said, yeah, you can go out, but you have to take your friend, your responsible friend X or your sister or whoever. Um, when there are people in your child's life who can provide some of those safeguards, there's still questions like, can I make healthcare decisions for my child? Or can I do these fundamental things for my child? That's still a piece of it. But some of those vulnerabilities can really go away when you have a network. And Dana, I want you to talk a little bit about like developing that network and some of your advice along those lines, because one of the things I hear all the time is I don't have that network. Like my child
Yeah.
doesn't have that network. We don't have those people.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's real, right? People's lives are thin. The world is still an ableist place. And so that can be hard. Families get isolated. I'm sure Cheryl could tell you, what a joy it is to show up to families at the hospital and say, this is not the end of the world, right? And the world will keep moving because that doesn't always happen for people. And so we recognize that, right? And so we just really work to begin to think about, well, you know, the first question I always kind of ask is there really no one, right? Okay, so where do you spend time outside of school or work, right? Is there a religious community? Has your kid played soccer, right, on a team? Is there a coach that you stayed in contact with? So really looking, it's up here on this screen too, right? Thinking about the team. So really looking and looking deeply, and maybe it's not that anybody is ready to step up, but they're ready to be invited, right? And so we talk about that in the sense of the other thing that we talked about a little bit when we were prepping this was that you'll need that for guardianship too, right? That mom and dad or mom or just dad won't be able to do it all, and none of us live forever, right? So there's going to be a successor in that plan. So you need to be thinking about that kind of no matter what. And sometimes the ask to be in a supporter role is much smaller than the ask to be successor guardian, right? That you're asking a person, can you just do this thing, right? Can you're a great cook and my kid already kind of likes hanging out with you. Can y'all do dinner, once a month? Help them learn to cook some. That's a great role to invite someone into, right? That helps to build networks. I was talking to a family not long ago, and they said they got guardianship when their daughter was young, right, when she turned 18, and it's been about 18 years. She's 36 now, and that her life is just so much different that they're finding the guardianships kind of gotten in the way of some things, but they're aging and their friends are aging, and her brother hasn't exactly stepped up, and he loves his sister, but he's kind of nervous about this thing that feels like it's looming. And I said, well, is there one thing that he might be willing to do, right? Is there one thing? And they kind of hemmed and hawed. And I said, well, what about this? You were telling me about how you help your daughter pay bills. Could he do that? Could he do that thing? And dad was like, absolutely not. And mom was like, well, maybe. I mean, I actually think I've been doing a lot of that for her and she could take on some more responsibility. And I think he would. So that one ask can be important. So looking around, right? Looking around the community, I know that it can be tough. And then we talk about other places to start building some of that, right? That some of it takes getting out of your comfort zone. If you have been kind of isolated, we all had to do this after COVID, right? We had all kind of retreated. And we had to kind of work to get back out in the world. And those first couple of dinners were awkward, right? What do we do? But it does take some effort to do those sorts of things. But following the desires and interests of the person with a disability, right? So if it is soccer, well, man, we're just gonna hang out, right? We can go to a lot of soccer games and hang out with people playing soccer, and try to make those friendships and develop those kind of first steps, right? This is not you're not gonna meet people and say, hey, would you like to join my supported decision making team, right? We're making those introductory steps and making connections. And we have the benefit at GAO of having worked with another program for a long time called Citizen Advocacy. And that's all they do is make matches between people with disabilities and people without disabilities for building long-term relationships. And so we have some content on a website, a couple videos. I'd be happy to share that sort of stuff. But Katina says over and over again, she was like, she says two things that I think, maybe three things, but that I always find really important. That people are waiting to be asked, right? That people, she's always surprised over and over again about how people step up. That you want the right yes. So it's okay to get a no, right? But when you get that no, you might just ask, well, who else do you know? Right? Who do you think might do this? Right? And then the last thing is that oftentimes the answer to what is who. The answer to the problem, right, that we might be facing might be another person to walk alongside us and help to do that. And so those are just some thoughts. That's not, the how of this is a little more intense, but we do have some resources that can help with that. So we're about 10 minutes out from when we started, or from when we're supposed to end. So I'd love to get questions from you guys. I was trying to see if there's something in the chat. Yeah, Cheryl put in the chat, right? If you're considering post-secondary options, not all of the post-secondary schools will allow folks to attend with guardianship. So that's just something to consider.
I will say, I'll just add to that real quick. There are many programs that do allow
That is true. Yeah.
do allow you to attend under guardianship, but your guardianship petition usually has to include some specific retained rights, things like being able to agree to your picture being taken and some stuff like that. So that if you're considering post-secondary education programs, you would want to be very informed as you're going into a guardianship conversation.
Yeah. So
I think there's a question from Adrian Jones. Do you want to unmute yourself and ask?
yeah.
Hi. My question is kind of around Cheryl's comment regarding the post-secondary conditions for guardianship. And I guess my question is why? Like, why does it matter? Especially for post-secondary education. And like, if you can give some specific examples of what the limitation would be in a post-secondary education with having guardianship.
Yeah, so when we talked to the folks at UGA, they kind of consulted with us about this decision, and I don't think we really moved the needle. They were already kind of thinking this, is that one of kind of the essential parts of being in college is developing all those adulthood skills, right? And so having like being required to share additional information with another person can just get in the way, right? So all those educational decisions, what classes to take, what grades are, that on some level administratively that was a hurdle, right? That they didn't want to take on, but also just in the process of people having the space, to be an adult. They thought it was inconsistent, right? They thought it was inconsistent with the college experience, and literally would make students under guardianship different than students without guardianship. There'd be a whole separate set of rules that would have to apply. So, I mean, I often think about I fell in college, had a pretty bad injury, and woke up in the ER and was like, why did no one call my mother? Like I wanted my mother here, but that wasn't the expectation. And I learned a lot. I mean, unfortunately, I learned a lot from that situation. And so I think they're trying to create that opportunity for people. So I don't know if that's a great answer, but it's the answer I know.
Well, I would chime in and just say, in my experience with other post-secondary uh, programs, I think, being under guardianship, theoretically, if you have a guardian who is doing what they're supposed to do, they're supposed to be including the ward, the person under guardianship, in all of their decisions. It's just that the guardian is signing off. So I think a lot of other programs allow people under guardianship because, in theory, their guardian is just a supportive mechanism. Um,
All the other colleges in the state of Georgia, with the exception of UGA,
yeah,
allow
I
you
mean,
under guardianship,
it's
including Clemson Life, which is where a lot of these guys think about.
right. It's not something that has to be a one or the other. So I think that's important to know. But I do think that the idea behind a lot of these post-secondary programs is independence, and they're looking for people who are, able to function somewhat independently. So there's a piece of that there. I'm going to go to the next question, which is about using a special
Yeah.
needs trust, which is so it depends a little bit on how you set up a special needs trust. But if you set up what we call a living special needs trust, or one that exists when you sign it, as opposed to one that's contained within your will or other trust planning documents, then you have a trust. And you may or may not need to use it while your child is alive. I'm sorry, while you are alive. But the idea would be the fear I think a lot of people have is, oh, I have all this money that I want to leave, or maybe not even all this money. I have some money that I want to leave for my child, but I don't want to disrupt benefits, and my child cannot manage this money on their own. So you have your trust. You can make sure that your assets are funneling towards your trust, whatever assets you want to leave for your child. And then if you decided that you wanted to, you could put a condo for your child in the trust or whatever. It provides infrastructure so that your child can benefit from you financially without having any direct control over the money. So there's no risk of like a scammer getting to special needs trust funds or like, a beneficiary of a special needs trust promising their friend that they'll pay for vacation or whatever, anything like that. So if let's say that your child is, you know, 50 and you're 80, um, you're no longer providing immediate care. Maybe you haven't put a ton of money into the special needs trust, but you have some money in there for your child to live off of and do their thing, and you've got a trustee to manage it. That's like the real short and sweet way of saying that.
Yeah, and the only thing I'll add, to um, the locked, the super protection of the trust is with the trustee, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So we had this conversation again when we were prepping, that none of these scenarios are free from abuse and neglect,
Mm-hmm.
right? The trustees, absolutely, violate their duties and do terrible things. And there have been times where people have been trying to implement supported decision making, and it hasn't been enough support, right? There's none of these protect wholly against bad outcomes, right? That doesn't exist, unfortunately. So you have to be considering that. What is the risk, and what is the protection that I need, and what other safeguards might go with that, right? Because there's not 100% safe sort of thing. And I would say, I'm not even wrangling about 99 and 97%. There's risk in all of this, right? There's risk in all of this, and we just have to consider that. I want to try to get to Angela's question really quick. Does a lawyer need to set up supported decision making? No. So there about half the states in the union, I think we're at 24, do have supported decision making legislation. And even in those cases, it still really is, one of the big draws is that it is outside of court intervention, right? So in most cases, that's not necessary at all. The other thing that we didn't really talk about, though, is that you can use these other tools in the context of supported decision making. So you could be practicing supported decision making for things that people are really trying to build skills with, and say there's a financial power of attorney, right? We hadn't tackled that skill yet. We're not really ready for that, but we can do all this other stuff. Or someone has really complex medical needs and we want that advanced healthcare directive, but we're really like rocking and rolling with, spending money and budgeting. And you could have a special needs trust in that context. You can do lots of things in the context, right? So supported decision making is more of a mindset, a framework, right, than it is a thing. And even in the states where it's a thing, it's a legal tool or a legal process, it's really designed to be flexible, meet the needs of that particular person. So Georgia might be on that list one day. We don't have a supported decision-making law right now. But if you remember back to when I talked about the statute, right? The statute for guardianship does say we should be pursuing less restrictive alternatives. And we help make the case for people all the time that guardianship is a less restrictive alternative. Is it easier to get things set up before a child's 18, or should we wait till after? So I think this depends. I think you can be teaching decision-making skills now, right? Folks with 4 and 5-year-olds, right? Helping young folks gain the skills to make decisions, you can do right this second. A special needs trust, you can do before a person turns 18. When it comes to the things that people have to have capacity to do, they have to be 18, right? That's our culture's rule about it, right? So can you sign a power of attorney at 17? No. Can you sign a HIPAA release at 17? No. Can you, do the advanced directive or any of those things? No. You can start the process for guardianship at 17 and a half. You can file the petition at 17 and a half. But the things that people have to be adults to do, they have to be adults to do, right? But I don't think that means the planning, right? I tell people all the time, supported decision making is not a good crisis planning tool. It's not,
Yeah.
right? We're building skills, we're developing a network, we're doing all those sorts of things. I don't think guardianship is a good crisis planning tool, right? We get calls from folks all the time who, unfortunately, none of this planning happened, and they've ended up before the probate court and they have a public guardian, and God bless those people, but that's a hard job, and it's not the support you want for your kid, right? And so as much as possible, when we can be thoughtful about this, that's a better place to be. So start early. I tell people I don't think it's ever too early to be thinking about this, ever too early to be planning for this. So I know we're a little over time. I want to say one last thing. There's a QR code on your screen that is a feedback survey. We do get grant funding, and it's really helpful for us to have information about who was here. But also, I really do go back and rework and build presentations based on this feedback. We've added things, we've added whole topics based on feedback that we've gotten. So I do also want kind of your opinion as well. So check out the QR code. I will send slides to Cheryl. I'll add that because they're not in the slides, but I'll add the stuff about building a network. We've got a couple videos, a couple kind of courses you can take to learn a little bit more about that if that's stuff people are interested in. And then I didn't throw my contact information up here, but I'll stop sharing and put it in the chat. I'm happy to talk to folks. I host a monthly kind of evening setting like this, where you can just come, and I call it Ask Me Anything, right? And we can talk it through. So you can find that information on our social media. You can send me an email. I'm happy to do any of that. Adrian has a question, and I can hang out for a few more minutes. It's already way after work time. But if other folks have to go, I realize that might be important.
My question is,
I'll just chime in really quick here, and then Adrian, you can. The only other thing I just want to say on all of that is, the Georgia Advocacy Office also has great resources for supported decision making on their website. And if you decide to go the guardianship route, or you want to investigate the guardianship route, any attorney should be having all of these conversations with you. So if you go in and your attorney says yes, okay, then you should find another attorney. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to you, Adrian.
okay, quick question. Might be kind of silly, but how are you able to, how is someone able to tell if my child has guardianship or if they don't? If they don't?
They can't.
Okay. So
Yeah.
a child, let's say my daughter is 25, her sister, cousin, whoever takes her somewhere and gets a car in her name, but she has guardianship under me. But they go through the whole process and everything is signed. What happens? Like, does a red flag somewhere? No? Okay.
So what
So
I do,
I was
Dana,
gonna say this is, yeah, go for it, Laura. You go.
we'll probably both have to answer this question, because what I would say is, this is the kind of scenario where sometimes I say, guardianship may be appropriate. If they can't sign powers of attorney, if they don't have capacity for those things, and they're the kind of person that may go out and do something like this, if you have guardianship, they will be able to follow through with the purchase of that car, but you can march right back to that car dealership with your letters of guardianship and say, hey, this person is under guardianship. They could not enter into a legal contract, and they can get out of it. Right. So that would be what I would say. Dana, what would you say to that?
Yeah, that's, I mean, we're going to say the same thing here, right? I mean, slightly different on maybe that means they need guardianship, but the remedy, right? The remedy is stronger here, right? I think the remedy is stronger here than the $100, honestly, right? I mean, the law is the same, but banks have been like, well, they made a mistake, they get a little, but I think the remedy is stronger for major contracts like that. Is it still hard work? Yeah. Sometimes do attorneys have to get involved? Yeah. So I still go back to my, fundamental response, which is, if this is something you're worried about, how can we help protect this person with skills, with other supporters? There was a mom who we talked about this. This is really what she was worried about for a kid. And she said, if you put a pen in front of him and a line, he's going to sign it. And I said, okay. I mean, that's good to know. We know that's a deficit. What else could we do to build into that? And we started with the idea, right, of teaching him who else had to be in the room if there was a pen and a line to sign, right? Mom's got to be in the room. Sister's got to be in the room. If you're in a room by yourself, you don't know the other person, right? And we started building those skills because that's what she was really worried about. And we were able to build those skills and kind of, we could test that, right? I'd been working with Mom for a long time and never met this kid. And when she had done all this work and we got together, and I showed up and asked him to sign something. And he was like, but I don't know you. And I was like, all right. Right. So if we can get there, right. I mean, and that's not where this young person started. but yeah, I mean, because then we don't have to unravel the contract, right? We don't have to jump through all those hoops. And he is stronger. He is more confident. So yes, absolutely, you could get out of the car contract. But could we not get there in the first place? Can we try that? So, Angela.
Okay, sorry. I have actually two things. One is to kind of contribute to the parents that have younger kids. My daughter's 20. She's still in school in Cherokee County. Regarding like healthcare, when you establish a relationship with your pediatrician, they can stay with their pediatrician through 20, probably the day before their 21st birthday, I think. At least that's how mine works. And so and then with she also sees doctors at CHOA for cardiology, and they're going to let her stay until 23-ish, maybe, I'm not exactly sure what age. But in terms of I've never signed a HIPAA. I've just built a relationship with her pediatrician and her doctors over the years. And when she turned 18, they they ask you to sign stuff, but it was never so far, knock on wood, it's not been an issue in terms of me. I'm still in charge of her health care. I've still been able to contribute and have say. They don't take her away from me or, because of the relationship I built. Just, I don't know if that eases anybody's mind. I started the process of, I hired a lawyer a few years ago, right after she turned 18, paid him, but then I put the brakes on. So where I'm at right now, she still lives at home. She's still in school. She'll stay in our school district until the day before her 22nd birthday. So kind of right now we're just trucking along. But I put the brakes on with my lawyer and just kind of let everything fall to the wayside. But I know that I do want her to do the post-secondary whatever, to go somewhere after she graduates from our county. Saying all this to say, I've talked to people about my lawyer about supported decision making. Nobody really knows. They don't really have any suggestions on how to do it. I want to pick back up. I've been emailing my lawyer, and he's like, "Well, I'll have to come back in and sign stuff." So I just need to figure out, okay, if I do supported decision making, how do I transition, uh, do I do supported decision making? He doesn't know how to do it. He's there like,
So here's what, Angela, here's what I'll say. So in Georgia, we don't have any law that says here's how to do supported decision making. And so as the lawyer, I have asked, there are things called supported decision making agreements that are out and about. I think those are meaningless in Georgia from a legal perspective because there's no law that will back them up. So this is where I think probably lawyers and like folks at the GAO kind of divide a little bit is if you're asking a lawyer to set up legal infrastructure for your child, for representation for your child for the future, the only way that we as lawyers know how to do that is through financial powers of attorney, advanced directives for healthcare, and so forth. And then if those documents aren't an option because we as lawyers don't feel that your person has capacity to sign, then guardianship is the only other way to put a legal representative in place to make legal decisions. So this is where lawyers, I think, diverge a little bit because kind of black and white on paper, that's it, right? And so what I would say is talk to your lawyer more about your goals, like Dana's saying. And it may be that so I have clients whose kids, again, they're like 50 and they're still talking to the doctors, right?
yeah.
So I also tell people if people are hesitating on guardianship, sometimes I say, maybe wait and see, like you can wait and see if you run into any issues. I think the biggest fear factors for people are this like ER visit kind of situation or something.
I think my main thing is like y'all touched on this earlier, just more for her protection, the guardrails, being safe. If she gets in a situation where anyone tries to deceive her or trick her or talk her into doing something illegal, and she's just like, "Oh, okay, I'll do it," because things like that concern me. I guess if I go back to my lawyer and say, okay, well, I want to do supported decision making, but maybe on the legal side, just say, would I want to just maybe do the power of attorney and then the healthcare thing, conservatorship? Are there things you can do like financial and healthcare?
If she has
It's
capacity to sign those documents, then yes,
that's the
like
thing. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. And I mean, and I think
Yeah.
that's going to be an attorney by attorney kind of assessment, right?
Okay.
Which is, is one of the things that we don't love about it, right? Because the standard isn't clear enough always, right?
Yeah.
But to your question, Angela, I'll try to make this as simple as I can for you. Yes, if your person has capacity, the attorney will participate in them executing power of attorneys and advance directives. You can set up the trust, you can do all those things. And to me, the goal of supported decision making, the process of supported decision making, is helping that person learn to make decisions, and having people in their life that can advise them on that. And so it is that's why like having the lawyer do supported decision making doesn't really
Yeah.
jive because it's not what they do. So number one, you can email me. We can continue this conversation. I can talk you through some of those supported decision making agreements and plans that help build that skill. And we can kind of figure that out. So
I want
that's
to.
the best that I think I can help you with in the limited time that we have.
Sure.
But that's the process of supported decision making is a little bit different than these legal processes. You're not appointing a supported decision maker.
yeah,
I've
right.
seen people talk about it that way, right? I want
Mm.
Laura to be my supported decision maker. No, 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 that's not what we're talking about. That's not how this works. And so it does take a little bit more to kind of understand and think about what that might look like. But I'm happy. Email me, hop on the website. There's a contact form. I'm happy to continue that conversation.
So, and I'm
Okay.
gonna jump in here now. And Adrian, is it like one quick question?
I think so. My question is, can someone scoop in and get guardianship of your adult child that you don't have guardianship
It's
for?
really hard to do that because there's so many checks and balances in the
Okay.
system.
Yeah.
And actually,
Oh,
that's a
and
really good
I want to
question.
give the technical answer to your question, Adrian, earlier, Adrian. How do people know if my kid has guardianship? And Laura's right. Nobody knows just by looking at them, but the technical answer is that someone provides the letters of guardianship, right? That this is the proof that this person is under guardianship or that I am the guardian. And so those are that's the technical answer, is that someone shows up. And we were having this conversation with another attorney that so when people do have those guardianships where rights are retained, well then how do people know? Right, it's the same thing, right? It's hard to kind of sometimes communicate that sort of stuff. But we have some ideas and solutions for that too, about how you more quickly can help people communicate kind of who they are and how they make their decisions. So again, steal the email address, ask Cheryl if you don't remember it. She can always find me, and I'm happy to dive into any of these kind of more individual sort of situations and think about what we can do to help you support your person.
So here's what I'm gonna say is, first of all, I love this format, and I think y'all did a great job to have the conversation, because like I said, when somebody's just all about guardianship and somebody's just all about supported decision making, I don't think that people are able to process kind of, I think I heard that and all that. So this was huge. I really, and actually y'all were such great presenters as well, and made it seem easier and made it seem like a conversation. Um, One of the things, and I think I've shared this with Hannah before, one of my favorite statements is by my mentor, and it was dignity of risk. And sometimes that's a lot of how, hopefully, the folks that we work with and your children, that's what we allow them, is the dignity of risk. And so I think on a broader level, again, I don't have a child with an intellectual disability, so I would never judge anybody for whichever route they go. I just want people to be educated. That's all. And I think y'all did an amazing job tonight. So I'm actually going to put, and maybe one or both of y'all on the hot seat again, is I would love to invite you back, Dana, and maybe you could have a conversation with our families on how to prepare people and do what you said. I
Yeah.
think that that gives us just that next step again that I don't see very often that's out there. But how do I train my how do I train my child to not sign on that line and make sure I'm in the room? And so I think that there's even more in depth that we could go. And I will speak to you about that later.
Yeah, absolutely. I tell people all the time, as evidenced by the fact that it's 9:18, I will talk about supported decision making all day, and I'll talk about it to anyone. And so I'm happy to do that. But yeah, use the email link, ask Cheryl, and if we get back together, I'm happy to do it. I'm actually, some of you mentioned CHOA. I'm doing a session at CHOA this weekend. They're having a healthcare transition fair. So might see some of you there. We're out and about in the community. If you belong to other groups, right? You're thinking, I want this for my faith community. I want this for my pickleball team. I don't care. I'll come and we can chat about it. And I think just hold on to that idea that you're, ask the questions. What are you trying to solve? What are you hoping to accomplish? Because I think if you ask those questions, it's going to get you where you need to go. And if that's to us and supported decision making, rock on, right? If your kiddo, the person you care about, needs more support in the form of a guardianship, my job is to make sure that people are free from abuse and neglect, right? So if that's how we're going to get there, then that's how we get there. So that's the most important thing.
So if there's no other questions, thank you again, Dana and Laura, as always. I learned a lot tonight, so that always feels great as well.
Yeah.
After this
Thanks, Laura.
many
This
years,
was
I think
so much fun.
after this many years, I think I know it all, and I don't even know half of it. So
And
thank
thanks,
you all for coming.
Cheryl, for getting us together.
Yeah, likewise. I love this.
Yeah, it was great.
Now y'all can go take it on the road. So I think it's just such an important thing. So anyway, thank y'all for coming. Hope to see y'all sometime in March at the Capitol or wherever in a park near you, as we celebrate World Down Syndrome Day. And don't forget to rock your socks.
Yeah.
I'll talk to y'all. Y'all
Have
take
a good
care.
night, y'all.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.